Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about Shadows of Change 4th Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires patch 6.1. And what I want to talk about in this video is whether or not it is worth purchasing Shadows of Change or individual packs that are part of Shadows of Change, be it Bo, Ostankya, or the Changeling, given that Creative Assembly has split them off into their own individual DLCs. For the record, Shadows of Change, based on information we have, is the worst performing DLC for Creative Assembly in a large number of years. I imagine Creative Assembly is hoping to increase sales of the DLC with the various improvements they've done, as well as splitting off the different Legendary Lords into their own DLC. As a whole, I have to say that I do not think Shadows of Change in its entirety is worth purchasing. That is a flat out no. But what about the individual packages? What is worth it and what is not worth it? It will depend on what you're looking for, but there are going to be some things that are flat out no, some things maybe, really. And obviously what they've put more effort into improving, like Kislev, is obviously going to be more worthwhile. But let's take a look at the individual packages of SOC. So let's start off with Cathay. Cathay was in the best position before the release of Shadows of Change out of the free races, so out of Tzeentch, Kislev, and Cathay. Cathay was the most playable race. Tzeentch and Kislev were pretty horrible. It has been improved for them, and it has been improved for other races, and I think Cathay, in quite a few respects, has actually fallen behind. Cathay is one of those weird races. It's not inherently broken when you're looking at the unit roster or their economy. Both of those work. The research tree. A lot of elements that Cathay has do work. But there's a couple of problems. For what it is worth, what you are getting as part of Shadows of Change as a DLC is pretty solid insofar as Cathay goes. So you get Bo with the Matters of State mechanic. The Matters of State mechanic is a great mechanic. This is why it works so well for Karl France or Greases to have a variation on it, because it is built on this mechanic, what their unique mechanics have. But here's the problem. While that mechanic is great, and Cathay is certainly a playable race, there are certainly some issues to contend with when you're talking about playing a Cathay campaign in general and playing Bo's campaign. Cathay is a great area of the campaign map early on. For Lokier, for Tzeentch, for anyone that has to deal with Cathay, it can be a really fun and dynamic area. But here's the problem. Unlike, say, Tzeentch or Lokier or Gelt, who have other things on their plate to deal with, the problem that does exist with respect to Cathay, and specifically for Cathay as a race, is you do conquer Cathay and then you have nothing else to deal with, or very, very little. The reasoning behind this is a climate situation. So other campaigns of other races that are much better, they have this area early on in a campaign where they expand, they spend the first 20, 30 turns. Cathay has that, but then they also have the potential of a longer term campaign. That is where the problem kicks in for Cathay, because they don't have a lot of climates available. And it actually hurts Cathay more than other races in certain respects. I would say that one of the problems has to do with the harmony system, and obviously, spending more money on constructing stuff and more time on constructing stuff is pretty annoying to begin with, isn't especially great for Cathay, however. But the bigger problem is actually to do with Cathay's lack of replenishment here. See, certain races can handle unpleasant climate just because they have so many benefits on a racial level that they don't necessarily care about it. One of those aspects is having a good casualty replenishment hero. That is something Cathay lacks. In fact, if Cathay had gotten a casualty replenishment hero with the Game Master, and we didn't, we got training, which is meaningless or not as important, I think it could have been better, but then you would have had to contend with the fact that you are neighboring mountains over here in the Mountains of Morn, and you don't have a great way of navigating them. In fact, this is one of the issues that the Greenskins had, one of the issues Nurgle still has, just navigating the mountains without the underway is just not a great campaign dynamic. Now, one could argue that Yan Bo has a better situation in this respect. To be sure, he does have an extra climate compared to Miao Ying Xiao Ming, in that he has jungle. They don't have jungle as a pleasant climate, so that is a limiting factor in their campaigns. But here's the problem with that. Yes, you have matters of state. Yes, you do get extra units, and they're pretty solid units. I mean, Game Master may not give you replenishment, but solid enough hero, right? You'll look at things like the Jet Lions, J Lions, Celestial Lion, the Great Moonbird. Those are all very solid units that you get as part of the DLC. You look at the Celestial General, very solid lore choice to get. So that is what you're going to pick up with the DLC. The downsides of Yan Bo's campaign in particular, well, his starting situation is pretty crap because you basically start with nothing. Like, you do start with free settlements, but they have nothing built in them, not even ports. That is going to be a slow and annoying start every time you begin this campaign, so I'm not sure what Creative Assembly was thinking about that. But the other problem is Lustria without some form of good traversal like the Skaven have or the Dwarves have is just not a great campaign dynamic. Consider this. Khorne has a phenomenal situation in terms of casualty replenishment, a good situation in terms of climate capabilities. But I would say Skull Taker's campaign is the worst Khorne campaign to play right now just because of Lustria itself. Lustria is not a really well-designed area of the campaign map. It's slow, it has twists and turns, it has terrain limitations. So it's inherently not going to be a particularly great area to engage in a campaign. On top of that, you got to consider the objectives of Yan Bo's campaign. So your objectives are essentially go beat out Mazdamundi and then go beat up other people for these astronomic relays. That is not really a fun and engaging system. You start with very little, it takes a while to get to the interesting stuff, and all the while, your campaign is going to be decided very early on. Cathay in particular is absolutely ridiculous in the sheer amount of power they can get early on. To give you an idea, they can maintain armies that are as good in auto-resolve as, say, the Dwarves or Warriors of Chaos, even with Jade Warriors, but that's about it. But they can also maintain as many armies as the Skaven do. And I'm not talking about Skaven in the sense of the player control. No, I'm talking about Skaven under AI-controlled significant cheats, because you have so many upkeep benefits with Harmony and other effects that you, like, the Harmony itself can nullify an enormous amount of supply line. So that means you can maintain 24 stacks very early on in a Cathayan campaign that would bankrupt other factions by, like, say, turn 70. That is a ridiculous aspect. And you do also have to consider the Gate Master benefit over here with respect to that 10% upkeep for Jade Warriors with Halberds, Jade Warrior crossbowmen. It isn't going to lend itself to a varied campaign in terms of the unit roster. It's not going to lend itself to a great dynamic campaign in general. Like, the Matters of State mechanic is great, and it works for someone like Rhesus or Carl Francis, especially because of how dynamic Carl Francis's campaign is from turn 1. But you don't have that in Yan Bo's campaign. So for that reason, like, Cathay is the most playable out of the races without the SOC, but it's kind of fluff, basically. Like, the new units, sure, but do they actually matter in the campaign? Not as much. Are we really going to fully utilize Yan Bo's immense power, or are we going to be forced to deal with it? Not necessarily as much, because it does take a while to really utilize Matters of State, which is probably one of the downsides of Matters of State. Like, yes, commercial districts and other things in rush construction, like, there's some things like leveling the provinces and rush construction are useful, but a lot of other things do take just a while to unlock, like dozens and dozens of turns. I think Yan Bo's campaign would be a lot better in a more dynamic situation that wasn't the freaking jungle. That is an issue with the game in itself, that everything that relates to jungle for every single Legendary Lord is just not really a good portion of the campaign map, and that is affecting Yan Bo, among other things. So the Cathayan portion, unless you really enjoy Cathay, I would skip over it. Though I guess I would say if you've never played Cathay before and you're looking to jump into it, it's a decent enough situation. Like, I'm talking here from the perspective of someone who's played a lot of campaigns. You do get bored of Cathay after one point, but if you haven't experienced that and you want to jump into it, it might not be the worst decision, but outside of that kind of circumstance, I would not recommend Cathay. Next up on the list, we have Tzeentch and we have the Changeling. Well, this is a hard no. Cathay can be a maybe in certain circumstances, but I would flat out not recommend buying Shadows of Change. Even if you're looking to play Tzeentch. Like, if you're looking for a good Tzeentch campaign experience, I would firmly recommend Kairos or Village if you're really into that, as opposed to playing this campaign. And if you're looking for a Tzeentch DLC to enrich your experience, give you some variety, I think Champions of Chaos is a much better DLC. It certainly provides more useful things in your campaign than Shadows of Change does. The reason I say this, consider what Shadows of Change is going to offer you. It's going to give you the Cockatrice. Okay, that's a decent enough unit. Do you need it? Not really. It's going to give you the Changebringers, but it's kind of meaningless because, yeah, it's fun having a flying flamethrower. I'm not going to lie about that. But at the same time, it's just a very limited usage scenario. I'm not saying that, if you had the option of just getting them on their own, right, they wouldn't be worth it. But in terms of the units, I've played Tzeentch campaigns with Shadows of Change. I've played the Changeling campaign multiple times even. I cannot really recommend it. Like, consider Chaos Knights of Tzeentch versus, for instance, picking up like Centigors, right, of Tzeentch. One is much better than the other as a unit. So Champions of Chaos, like if you're looking for Tzeentch variety, Champions of Chaos, it's where it's at. The only real meaningful benefit that you would get from Shadows of Change with respect to Tzeentch is you do get a lore choice, you do get a hero choice, a melee hero choice, actually melee lord, melee hero. That is something that is lacking with Tzeentch. It doesn't necessarily matter, because Tzeentch has really good melee anyway, inherently. Like, you have Forsaken of Tzeentch as an inherent melee unit, and then you have Chaos Warriors, and Chaos Warriors with Halberds, and Chosen of Tzeentch. Like, the most worthwhile unit is actually the Tangor from Shadows of Change, but you literally do not need the Tangor when you have Forsaken of Tzeentch. I do prefer recruiting both of them, but, like, it's just worth it more to get Champions of Chaos. That is the perspective I'm going to have on that. In terms of the roster, what about the Changeling? Well, his campaign is, simply put, pretty bad. The reason it's bad, it's supposed to be this world adventure campaign with a very dynamic experience and really fun one. And we've seen with campaigns like Malachi and Arbol how great that can be. Or Oxyatl even. But this is not especially great because it's these set objectives, so you lose a lot of the dynamic aspects of that make a Total War campaign good. Some of these objectives can bug out, and these schemes that he's engaging in just feel very, very meaningless. Also, from my point of view, as much as I'm the kind of player who rarely loses battles in a campaign unless it's some settlement or anything like that, not losing a battle is different than not having any risk whatsoever, because you do have an inherent risk in almost all campaigns, even if it's a very minor risk. Whereas with the Changeling, you have almost no risk whatsoever. And that just, like, if you're looking to play the intern button simulator, fair enough. But I don't think that's a really good gameplay experience. Like, out of all the DLC campaigns in Total War, Warhammer in general, this is easily the worst campaign experience you will ever get. I'll say it plainly, I would rather play the Demon Prince than play this freaking campaign. Another thing that really annoys me about this is the way you interact with settlements. You either raise a settlement or set up a cult, but you don't want to raise a settlement. When you set up a cult, it's counted as sacking a settlement. The thing that's annoying is you're leaving factions alive. You don't have the diplomatic capability that other factions have. Like, Kairos is much better at dealing with the campaign map. He has a far more interesting situation on the campaign map. Whereas the Changeling is just go there, beat someone up, do maybe a quest battle. The quest battles are actually the best part of it, but the actual objectives to get there, just tedious, waste of time. You know you're not going to be challenged. You know you're not going to be at risk. And even if you lose an army, or all your armies, you probably will never lose this campaign. Like, I think you would have to try extremely hard in order to lose this campaign in general. It could be fun once just to experience the story aspect, I suppose, but even then, It is a drag even in that experience, and replaying it is just pure torture. This is the kind of campaign where you see some of the worst qualities of Creative Assembly, where there are clearly developers, and I'm going to be as blunt as possible on this. There are clearly developers, from my point of view, Creative Assembly have no clue how their game is played, don't know the pacing of the game. They might say, oh, campaigns are played in 80 turns. Okay, let me ask you the question. How many of those 80 turns that people on average complete, based on their own statistics, how many of those 18 turns are just people grinding out for a campaign victory as opposed to actually having a fun, dynamic experience? Don't get me started on the Realms of Chaos 160 turns campaign experience, because that's how many turns it takes you. And it is a drag to do that. Like, that's one of the reasons I would never play Realms of Chaos right now, especially as a veteran player, because, like, you finish the campaign in 30 turns, but you have to wait 160 to be over. And that's kind of the thing about the Changeling as well. You have to wait for things to be done in order to complete this campaign, as opposed to you being able to speed up and not having any kind of risk or anything like that. It's not even a question about the length, it's what you're doing. Because you can have long campaigns that take hundreds of turns. Sure, but it has to be a good experience. Total War Warhammer 3 has, in general, an issue with the endgame, and I think that the Changeling is probably the worst example of this. The only race I could probably consider worse to play is the Vampire Coast, but still. And again, if you're looking to play Tzeentch, you're not missing out on a whole lot if you own Champions of Chaos and you decide to play Cairo. So it's not worth it. Like, in terms of buying a piece of content for Warhammer 3, this should be the lowest priority on your list. So there's still work to be done. What do I make of Creative Assembly's statement that some people like the Changeling, or the opinions are divided? Well, first off, I'm not going to trust any marketing statement from Creative Assembly. I think they've done much better with communication, to be sure. I think that they're more open to the player base, but they still engage in marketing bullshit. The way I would read that statement in particular, I would say that they're trying to figure out how much people actually care, or if they want to put in the resources towards fixing Tzeentch in general. They improved Kairos to a degree, in a very minor way, but clearly the focus with 6.1 was on Kislev, not the Changeling, or Tzeentch in general. Still, now it absolutely was one of the worst campaigns to play before. It's still one of the worst campaigns to play right now. And that is not just an opinion on Reddit or forums or anything like that. Shadows of Change, objectively speaking, is the worst selling DLC in the company's history, unless you're counting, like, I know, pre-order bonuses like Ogre Race Pack, or maybe you talk about Total War Pharaoh, but it's like one of the worst selling DLCs that they've released in probably a decade, at least half a decade. And that's saying a lot about the situation. I cannot recommend the Changeling. I don't think it's worth spending our money on it. And that's where I stand on the subject. Finally, we get to Kislev. And out of the 3 races affected by Shadows of Change, this is the one that is worth buying the most. Now, Kislev obviously got a major rework with patch 6.1, and that did vastly improve the campaign experience. The question is then, is it worth buying Shadows of Change Mother Ostankya? Well, out of the 3 campaigns that are in Shadows of Change, Ostankya has the best campaign at the moment. She had a really horrible one. Actually, all 3 of them were horrible. But when a new starting position in Kislev that you can go for, and the landmarks that are exclusive to her, is a much better situation. The supporter situation that all Kislev campaigns have to deal with is much better for Ostankya than it is for Catra and Kostaltin. Boris Ursus has his own advantages, but as I said in my Kislev video, it is a real discussion on whether or not is better to play Ostankya or is better to play Boris Ursus. There's pros and cons with regards to that. As far as I personally see it, I vastly prefer Boris Ursus versus all the other Kislev campaigns combined, for a number of reasons that I've detailed over there. But let's consider what you're actually getting with Shadows of Change for Kislev if you do decide to buy it. And specifically with the Ostankya's campaign. But let's consider the unit roster, let's consider, and then go over Ostankya's campaign. So you get the Druzhina Lord as a Lord choice. How are the Druzhina as a Lord? Well, Personally, I find them a bit redundant. Like, I never used Druzina Lords because Boyars are decent enough, especially since they got the skill line change. And Ice Witch Lords are just flat out better than both Druzina and Boyars combined. So it's a bit of a whatever aspect as far as I see it. Like, Ice Witches just offer you more combat potential, more magic potential, more campaign benefits than both Boyars and Druzina combined, as far as I see it. That's not to say they can't work, and they do give you some benefits like spell resistance, diplomatic relations with Kislev, but there's other ways to handle that. On the flip side, the new hero that you get with Kislev, the legendary hero, yeah, absolutely worth getting that. So the Golden Knight. Then you have Hag Witches with their Lore of Magic. These are pretty good spellcaster. Like, Frost Maidens are strong, but there's no reason not to go for both Frost Maidens and Ice Witch. Hag Witches. Because you get character experience, magical attacks, potion of toughness, and ability usage. Then you get, or some other different benefits over here. And you also have a way of reducing attrition damage, which is actually quite important for Kislev, considering all the casts that they cast corruption that they have to deal with. And cast Wasteland attrition. So it is a useful hero. The Lord, not so much. The legendary hero, obviously very useful. The hero, absolutely useful. So from that perspective, it is worth it. In terms of the unit roster, considering those aspects, well, my point of view on the subject, obviously Regiments Renown always worth it, especially because they give you strategic reserve you can use across the campaign map, whenever things get dicey, or you just want some extra bit of combat power instantly. They are useful from that point of view. In terms of generic units, well, Akshinas obviously are very, very much worth it. Like, really strong ranged units. They don't have the same kind of durability that, say, Streltsy do, or even Ice Guard, but there's a reason why people do want to use them. Vanguard deployment stock, Woodsman, hiding in forest, good amount of range, good amount of range damage. Incarnate Elemental of Beasts, I personally never bother with it. It's not that it's broken, but there's almost no reason. Still, the thing about it is Kislev's army has always been very strong. The one weakness was having a good ranged unit that wasn't a gunpowder unit, and now they have that with Akshina. It might just be one unit that's very much worth it, but it is a very strong unit to use. Yes, you do have to conserve things like, the Frostworm and all that, but I consider that kind of in the fluff category. They're not bad. There's just no significant reason to really bother with them. Okay, so that is just what you're getting for Kislev. What about Ostankya's campaign? Well, you have a better campaign than Catherine Kastaltin. You have a better way of gaining supporters. You do have the top power abilities over here that give you a hilarious amount of power, like removing corruption, debuffing a lord. Oh, Archeon is coming to get you. Just disable his campaign movement range if you upgrade Coven's Curse Mark. Like, the default one is just going to slow him down, but you also have a unique research tree for Ostankya that will paralyze an army from moving. That's a very strong benefit. Like, there's all kinds of strong benefits over here, with the ultimate benefit that you get when you finish all of these quests and do her final quest battle is debuffing an entire race on the campaign map. So if you're dealing with an endgame crisis, I think Ostankya is actually, out of all the legendary lords, the best at dealing with that. From a very long campaign perspective, I think Ostankya is actually the best legendary lord of Kislev. There are some frustrations. The constant creation of buffs and debuffs for the witches' huts is annoying, but it is much better when you do start over here in Plesk, if you choose to go for that, because you don't have the same necessity to go to just get the teleportation so you can get to Kislev and unlock all the things over there. So that is a substantially better campaign experience, just because they do give you that starring choice. If you're playing Ostankya, you also have the ability of confederating all the other legendary lords of Kislev, whereas if you are playing any other legendary lord, you won't be able to confederate Ostankya without mods, and obviously you won't have her unique research tree or campaign mechanics. So I don't think it's a perfect campaign. I think it's a genuine discussion on whether or not it's better to have Boris Ursus versus Ostankya, but that's kind of like the same discussion on, is it better to play Karl Franz or Gelt or Elspeth? And that is not a bad position to be in. So surprise, surprise, the race that got the most out of 6.1 is the one that's worth buying the most. So at the moment, I would dare say that if you're looking to buy anything out of Shadows of Change, buy Mother Ostankya, even if you're not going to play her. Though I would probably recommend the Confederation mod, just Confederate her from the beginning and have a dual campaign of Ostankya and Boris Ursus. That might be really fun in a campaign. Also very crazy. It's also worth pointing out she has a much better climate situation than Catherine and Castalton, better supporter situation, just a far, far better campaign dynamic than either of them. But Boris Ursus is pretty damn ridiculous as well. That would be my perspective. So, Cathay, unless you're really into Cathay, not really. Tzeentch, absolutely no. Like, hell no. If you're asking me to buy Shadows of Change for Tzeentch, that's my answer. For Kislev, there are useful things. Actually, I forgot to mention the most important unit to actually get from Shadows of Change for Kislev. I just kind of forgot to mention it, because it's just a tier 1 unit, so you kind of just forget the little guys. But it's like, Kislev Warriors are a fantastic unit for Kislev, because armor Kossars do get the job done, to be sure, but they are tier 2. And the problem is just that tier requirement, and given how front-heavy all Kislev campaigns are, having Kislev Warriors is a game changer. Like, I'm not joking when I'm about to say that getting Shadows of Change for Kislev might just be worth it for Kislev Warriors alone. Like, these guys are better than most units in most DLCs put together because of their actual impact in a campaign. They're not the best units, far from it. They're a tier 1 unit with all the limitations that come with it. But having a solid line holder with anti-large and armor piercing early on in a campaign, especially as Kislev, when you're dealing with very heavy melee-focused armies, is a pretty substantial benefit in your campaign. Like, a lot of DLCs may have really cool and powerful units, sure, but how impactful are those units going to be? Like, are they going to be a game changer in your campaign? Most of the time, no. Like, people always bring up the Thunder Barge. Let me tell you, I've played dozens of dwarf campaigns, hundreds of hours in the dwarves. I have not recruited a Thunder Barge once, because I don't need to. And because my campaigns are long over by the time I can even recruit them. So why bother with that? Like, outside of the ones that Malachi inherently gets through his adventures, I have not bothered with recruiting Thunder Barges. But I have used a lot of Kislevite warriors. And that is one aspect, I would say, that makes the Kislev aspect, like, or a DLC good. It's when you have units that you actually want to use because they enrich your campaign experience. Now, of course, we then have a discussion about, like, you know, DLC practices, like, oh, is this DLC necessary for a race? And that can be bad, to be sure, because it's pay to win, all that. I wouldn't say it's necessary. You can certainly play a Kislev campaign without them, but they are an absolutely significant benefit. So are Akshinas. So are Hag Witches. But yeah, Kislev Warriors went out. Like, out of all the units in the DLC, I think they are the best unit in the entirety of Shadows Change, and saying a lot about them. I mean, Sangors get the job done, but redundant with Forsaken over there. Yes, I know they work differently, but point made. That's all I had to say. Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.